The face of work has changed drastically with the pandemic as more employees work from home, work hours being shortened, and four-day work weeks are starting to receive attention from companies around the world. In fact, some countries, including Spain and New Zealand, have been considering shortening work weeks for good without reducing salaries. So what are the incentives and some setbacks of a shortened work cycle, and what will the future of work look like after the pandemic? To discuss this, we connect with Stefan Arstal, founder and CEO of Tower Paddleboards, a company based in San Diego, and Marissa Baker, assistant professor of environmental and occupational health sciences at the University of Washington, joining us from Seattle. Thank you both so much for joining us today. And well, to go straight into the questions, let's start with you, Stefan. First of all, well, you've been shortening your work hours in your company in San Diego, and well, what prompted you to make this decision, and in what ways has the pandemic really changed the way your employees work?
Sure. So we went to a 5-hour workday in 2015. We started experimenting with it. At first, we did it for basically a 3-month period. We were going to see how it worked. And then we ended up extending it for about 2 years, did it full time. Now we do it in the summers only. But the reason we initially did it was a couple things. I mean, primarily, I wanted to attract and retain workers. So I was just sort of negotiating sort of a better deal with them. We would give you a compressed workday, and we felt we could attract the people that would work at 3 to 5 times the speed of everybody else. And so I said, I'm going to give you this compressed workday. You got to figure out how to be as productive or more productive than you were before, or you'll be fired. So put pressure on them, but also sort of give them their life back.
So, Stefan, would you say that this has worked? I mean, what's been the advantages of making hours a bit more flexible? And would you say this has led to some visible changes or tangible outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest positive change I would say was that we became a company culture of using productivity tools, identifying and using productivity tools, some of the free and cheap tools that are already out there. And that really was one of the impetuses for doing this as well, is because that's how, I've worked myself, and all my entrepreneurial friends that seem to be thriving in the sort of the modern economy, the knowledge worker economy. And it seems like, regular workforces, corporate workforces, are not using those tools. They're sort of throwing time at it, working longer and longer hours, and their productivity really isn't up that much. So that was, really our take on it, was you squeeze people and for time, and they'll be forced to learn and adopt. So that's what really worked. What didn't work is it kind of broke our company culture of being a startup. So work just became this thing you do before lunch, and I think the rest of their lives became much bigger and better. But we lost about half of our company in a 90-day period, about 2 years into this experiment. So it really didn't work to retain and attract workers, which seemed strange to me.
Right, but in terms of getting things done, I suppose the the pressure to get everything done within those compressed hours, it would work to a certain extent. So, well, Marissa, the premise of a shorter workday or work week really is that if an employee does focus on their job without distractions, then they can finish it within a 4 or 5 hour time frame. Do you see this actually working? And also, is this a healthy way for people to work?
I like to think about it more about not just about the time that people are spent working, but the amount of control that people have over their work days and the work that they're doing. So some individuals might want to work from 8 to 1, 5 days a week. Others might want to work from 8 to 8, 2 days a week, depending on what what aspects of their life are pressure points on their work. And ultimately, I think if we can move to a model where folks have a lot of control over what their workday looks like, it allows men to be more active as caregivers. It allows women more access to the workforce. It might cut down on the number of hours that people are commuting and the environmental impacts. So certainly, steps being taken to kind of normalize not working a typical 8 to 5 or 40-hour a week work day or work week, I think, are valuable. And I say, let's take it a step further and, to be even more supportive of health, to give people the flexibility to decide when those hours are in order to, really optimize the amount of time that they can have for their personal pursuits as well.
So Stephen, Stefan, I'm really curious how the changes that you introduced were actually received by your employees. And of course, I'm sure there are some workers who take advantage of sort of the shortened work hour situation. I mean, how did you deal with those kind of complications?
Yeah, well, that was the appeal to it that I thought workers would have is if you pay them with their own time back, they can turn that time into whatever they want to. Like, some people were very young and they were spending more time on their relationships. One of the reasons we lost some of the people was because they sort of developed these relationships and then moved off, onto another thing. I had a son at the time, so it allowed me to go to like more of his baseball games. Instead of being this like startup CEO, I was able to prioritize more time there. Some people wanted to make more money, so they got a side job, doing Uber or started their own little company on the side. So they were able to monetize that. And I think people really liked that. Now, I wasn't just looking at this kind of through a socialistic aspect of how can we make this world better for workers. I was also looking at from a very like a capitalistic standpoint of a company owner. Like I was trying to get all the best workers at my company, right? Give them a great deal. But I was trying to look at this really from both sides. And I think one of the downsides was that this became an entitlement very quickly. I wanted them to change how they worked. Instead of working an 8-hour day and wasting a lot of time and not using productivity tools, I wanted them to come in, heads down, work hard, and then let's get out of there and let's not, pretend to work and work these longer and longer hours. But what happened is people started to work kind of how they worked in the 8 or 10-hour day, just in a 5-hour day. So we had an entitlement problem for sure.
So clearly there's a purpose to working shortened hours. It's to ramp up your productivity by that much. And well, due to the pandemic, Marissa, now working from home is not really considered an option anymore, but it's become a default mode for many companies across the US. And obviously the perks are 0 commute hours for workers and reduced costs for businesses. But then it also means less interactions between colleagues. And well, what does this mean for, teamwork and also people who really enjoy those water cooler conversations and can feel rather lonely working at home by themselves? I mean, how would this really affect the dynamics of the company?
Yeah, certainly. There's no one size fits all that's going to make every worker happy. Some folks would prefer to work from home at all times. Others like a hybrid approach. And then still others would prefer to be in the office the whole time. And I think that is, determined by their family life, their personal characteristics. Do they have roommates? Are they safe in their home? Do they have an appropriate work setup? With access to the tools and that they need in order to be productive in their home. So some of it is, again, kind of, I just reject the one size fits all way of working. We've seen through this pandemic that we can work from home. Some folks maybe took to it better than others, and some businesses probably had different levels of, it worked better for different businesses than others, but I hope that we can kind of keep this momentum and continue to provide this flexibility and choice to workers so they can ultimately optimize their schedules to not only get their work done, but also to, enjoy their outside of work pursuits and foster their, the best mental health that they can for themselves.
And Stefan, while you were rolling out your sort of shortened hour plans, it seems that you were considering this plan from both perspectives of an employer and an employee as well. But what were some issues that you weren't able to anticipate and later had to resolve?
Yeah, well, the biggest issue was that I don't think people cared, at least not my company. They didn't care about having a 5-hour workday. It didn't retain them. They didn't stay with the company. So it seems like people don't care what you pay them and what your hours are. Like I could be Elon Musk and work them out, 100 hours a week, and they might be perfectly happy. I think it came down to the fact that this was not a magic bullet to get the best workers. They cared more about the company, like what the company does and this and that. We could get good workers before. That's why we were a successful company before, and we're a successful company after, not because of our work, how we changed the work world, but really the type of company that we were. So that was really disappointing for me because I thought it would be a way to attract and retain workers, and it didn't really work.
But Marissa, a growing number of companies and multinationals as well, they're considering making work from home permanent, shortened hours permanent. But as they do so, what are the sort of grey areas that need straightening out, especially when it comes to costs like utilities, stationery that you might be using at home, and also liabilities? I mean, if you, for instance, get hurt at home while you're doing work.
Yeah, so I think for a lot of companies, when we moved to a primarily work from home modality, 15 months ago, we didn't realize that it was going to be for so long. It was kind of like, oh, it's going to be for a couple weeks. We'll just send people home. We'll hope for the best. And, we'll be back in the office in no time. But as it continued to stretch on, I think a lot of these pressure points began to be exposed. So some workers might have a very small space and they don't have an appropriate setup. They are, working on their bed and they don't have a desk, or they don't have adequate internet, or maybe it's tough to find somewhere to print. So it can be big things or small things. Also just the pressure point of if the schools are closed and childcare is closed, suddenly you're doing two jobs at home, right? You're providing childcare and homeschooling, and you're also trying to work. So certainly, things like that. It's we would like to see every worker in an ergonomic, appropriate setup that's private and safe at home. That's just not possible in all spaces, and that can be at a huge expense to the business to feel they need to outfit multiple offices. But it is something that we need to think about. And if folks are working in awkward positions for long periods of time, and there's increased rates of musculoskeletal disorders, even if a person is working from home, at least in the United States, the workplace still is responsible for injuries or illnesses that occur, from work and during those work hours, even if it's at home. And so I'm hoping that as we move into a more kind of, for some companies, a more formalized work from home arrangement, that this is considered and folks think about what steps they can take to keep folks healthy and safe, both at home and at the office.
And Marissa, in terms of moving forward, do you expect businesses to continue adopting flexible work hours and remote work even after the pandemic is over? Or do you think these options are just going to stay limited to just a handful of industries?
I think that it's very attractive to many individuals, particularly younger folks. There, can be an expectation of being able to work from home some, or, telecommuting. Of course, it just won't work in all industries. And the type of people that we are talking about who can work from home is a very small slice of the U.S. workforce. Previous work I've done has estimated only about 25% of U.S. workers are in jobs that can be done from home. So for the wide majority of workers who have been working during the entire pandemic outside of the home, it's probably going to continue to look the same. But for the workers who have been working from home and are in industries that lend themselves to being done from home, I am optimistic that there will be some kind of shifting the needle a little bit more toward flexibility and longer term, hybrid approach to having workers at home and in the office.
Well, Stefan, what are some changes you expect to stay after the pandemic is over?
Well, we've been experimenting with the workday since 2015, really. So some of the initial things we thought didn't actually pan out. So I think it's great that people are thinking about how they worked. Because our work hours, the 8-hour workday, was essentially set 100 years ago for the Industrial Revolution. It's so humans could work alongside machines in 8-hour shifts while the machines go 24 hours. In America, nobody works in a factory anymore, right? So the fact that we're using that model to work is insanity. We should really be thinking about how we're working. So, with our experiments, there's been good and bad. I think the people working from home is going to ultimately be a disaster for a lot of companies. I think the workers are not going to want to go back to the office. And something like 30% of U.S. workers say if their company forces them to go back into the office, they're going to leave that job for some other company that will let them still work from home. So the Pandora's box has been opened here, and it's going to be tough, I think, for a lot of companies and workers. So I think there's some good things, there's some bad things, but the most important thing is that we've had a constraint put upon society, and that tends to bring out creative solutions. So I think you're going to see a lot of creativity in thinking about how we work.
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time today, so this is where we'll have to leave the interview. But that was Stefan Ostel, founder and CEO of Tower Paddle Boards, a company based in San Diego, and Marissa Baker, assistant professor of environmental and occupational health sciences at the University of Washington. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you very much for watching.